What's up, guys? Dominic here again. Today I'm going to be talking about the Tower of Babel, and I'm going to be offering the truth about what this story is about. Now, right off the bat, there are two Towers of Babel, and I will be getting into that. But I want to address that there are multiple ways to interpret these stories, all of which are technically correct. You can interpret these literally or historically. You can interpret this allegorically or mythopoetically, or you can interpret this through an astronomical lens or physiological lens. Furthermore, within these interpretations, there are layers to the interpretations which are either exoteric or more esoteric, meaning that some of these interpretations are closer to the truth than others. I am going to be providing a historical and esoteric interpretation to these stories, as well as at the end provide philosophical and allegorical interpretations to these stories as well. But for the most part, this will be a historical and literal breakdown of the Towers of Babel and what they are actually about. So to analyze the Tower of Babel, we're going to be looking at primary sources, secondary sources, even a tertiary source. And this is the first primary source that any scholar will point to prove that the Tower of Babel existed definitively in history. This stele right here with Nebuchadnezzar standing over his ziggurat, which he calls Edamananke. And this stele, which there's writing on there, translates to the house, the foundation of heaven and earth, ziggurat in Babylon, caption identifying the great ziggurat of Babylon. The Tower of Babel, the royal inscription of Nebuchadnezzar continues, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon am I. In order to complete Edamananke and Irmamananke, I mobilized all countries everywhere, each and every ruler who had been raised to prominence over all the people of the world, loved by Marduk from the upper sea to the lower sea. The distant nations, the teeming people of the world, kings of remote mountains and far-flung islands, the base I filled in to make a high terrace. I built their structures with bitumen and baked brick throughout. I completed it, raising its tops to the heaven, making it gleam bright as the sun. And I'm just going to draw attention first to, he mentions two names here, Edamananke and Irmamananke, which represent two ziggurats or two towers, which he states he mobilized all countries everywhere in order to complete the towers for his god Marduk, who he says loved the people. And this stele is dated to approximately 604 to 562 BC, because that's when Nebuchadnezzar was around, and that's when this tower was around. And from the bricks of the Tower of Babel were stamped his name, which were used during the rebuilding, which his whole project was a rebuilding of Borsippa. However, these bricks were baked in huge buildings, which were basically ovens at very high temperatures, and they were all uniform. They were all made to look exactly the same, very similar to the concept of one language, and they all had the king's stamp of approval on them, signifying that they all belonged to Babylon. And they were all uniform and perfect in the eyes of the king. And it states right here it has been calculated that at least 17 million bricks had to have been made and fired to make the Tower of Babel, which they say took 43 years of work. And they mentioned the other ziggurat. The ziggurat in Babylon was originally built around the time of Hammurabi from 1792 to 1750 BC. This is a mistake. This ziggurat they're talking about here would have actually been built in Borsippa. That's where the tower Irme-Menanke is. And Nebuchadnezzar would have built Eda-Menanke in Babylon. And also this tower here would have been built around Hammurabi's time, did not use the bricks baked in the large oven buildings. However, it did take approximately the same time period of 42 and 43 years to make these towers, which states they were never completed. Right? His whole project is in order to complete the towers. So while they took 42 years to build, they were never completed. And it also mentions Herodotus. Right here, Herodotus, the Histories, was one of the best things that people had for a long time until they found these tablets. And we will look at Herodotus, the Histories. But he describes a very similar looking tower, which has been the inspiration for a lot of medieval art. And it goes on about the histories and compares it to Genesis as well. Talks about it. This basically just says that the people who wrote Genesis, when they were in Babylon, they were writing about Eda-Menanke, the tower that would have been ruled over by Nebuchadnezzar, and that they would have seen basically a hive mind of people who were conforming to the language of Babylon, which eventually collapsed, and they saw it all. However, the tower having a scattering of the languages and the one language, this is older than the tower Eda-Menanke, and it belongs entirely to the other tower, which I stated was built in Borsippa, that they're mentioning here in the time of Hammurabi. The name Borsippa actually translates to tongue tower, and we'll look more into that tower. However, they are describing Eda-Menanke in Genesis as well as the other tower. But here is what the stele would have actually looks like. It's very damaged. It's very old. It's about 2,500 years old. Here is an inscription right there of cuneiform. This is a top view of the tower. And this is what the tower would look like if you were looking at its face on the ground. And here's some more cuneiform inscription. And King Nebuchadnezzar standing on the right. And here's a drawing of this, just so where it doesn't look so broken. Top view of the tower, the layers upon layers of the tower, and the king overlooking the tower with approval. Now here is another translation we're going to look at. This one is by Henry Rawlinson, who is the creator of Assyriology, who translated a cylinder at Birs Nimrod, or Borsippa, during the 1800s, which dated to about 600 BC, or the time of Nebuchadnezzar. And it reads, "I am Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. My great Lord has established me in strength and urged me to repair his buildings. The Tower of Babylon I have made and finished. The tower of Borsippa had been made by a former king. He had completed 42 cubits, but he did not finish its head. From the lapse of time, it had been ruined. The rain and wet penetrated into the brickwork, and the casing of the burnt brick had bulged out. Merodach, my great lord, inclined my heart to repair the buildings. I did not change its site, nor did I destroy its foundation, platform, but in a fortunate month, and upon an auspicious day, I undertook the rebuilding, and sat my hand up to build it up, and to finish its summit. As it had been in ancient times, so I built up its structure. So this is another translation of this same stele found in Borsippa. And remember, as I said, that Babylon would have been making millions of uniform bricks, all conforming to the same standard that the king set for it. And this is an example of how that spread. We have the same inscription found in Babylon. I think this was found, says it's a recent discovery. But this one was found in the 1800s, and it says the same thing, just in different places, found at different times, written at the same time. And this one is more complete than this version, likely because the cylinder that Rawlinson translated was less damaged. Merodach, my great lord, built by a former king, which they mention here as Hammurabi. Hammurabi is the king who built the former tower of Borsippa. And here's another translation by Julius Oppert, who was a student of and contemporary of Rawlinson. He translates the same thing, but instead of saying 42 cubits, he says 42 ages ago, but he did not complete its head. So something about ages, something about 42 years to make the towers, and 42 cubits high, 42 ages. But the point is that he's making these towers for a former king in honor of the god that the former king worshipped. That's what's important here. That's what's going on. And Herodotus speaks of this. We're going to look at chapter 181 of the Histories. Well, we'll go, these other chapters here, they also describe Babylon. This one just basically describes Babylon as being a great place that was defensible. This one talks about the effort they put into strengthening their defenses. This one talks about how the city was divided according to the riverbanks. And this one is more about the tower that sits in the center of the city, which states, the outer wall is the main defense of the city. There is, however, a second inner wall of less thickness than the first, but very little inferior to it in strength. The center of each division of the town was occupied by a fortress. In the one stood the place of the king, surrounded by a wall of great strength and size. In the other was the sacred precinct of Jupiter Belus, Marduk. Marduk represents Jupiter because Jupiter is the chief patron planet of the planetary archetype gods. A square enclosure 2 furlongs each way with gates of solid brass, which was also remaining in my time. In the middle of the precinct was a tower of solid masonry, and furlong in length and breadth, upon which was raised a second tower and a third, and so up to an eighth. So as we saw in the Stele and the depiction of the Tower of Edamananke, which is what he's describing here, it's just platforms on top of platforms. And the ascent to the top is on the outside by a path which winds round all the towers. When one is about halfway up, one finds a resting place and seats where persons are wont to sit some time on their way to the summit. On the topmost tower there is a spacious temple, and inside the temple stands a couch of unusual size, richly adorned with a golden table by its side. There is no statue of any kind set up in the place, nor is the chamber occupied of nights by anyone but a single native woman, who is, as the Chaldeans, the priests of the gods, affirm is chosen for himself by the deity of all the women in the land. So you have the god who is basically channeled through this temple, which is full of gold, and a woman specifically picked out for him. And this god is the representation of Jupiter. And notice again the layers upon layers. So he is describing Edamananke. And here he describes the woman. She's just a she's supposed to be chastised and only subservient to the god. And he compares it to Egypt and other cultures. Herodotus thinks it has a more allegorical interpretation, and he notes that he does not think that the god actually comes down into the temple. But chapter 183 reads, below in the sacred precinct there is a second temple, in which is a sitting figure of Jupiter, all of gold. Before the figure stands a large golden table, and the throne whereon it sits and the base on which the throne is placed are likewise of gold. The Chaldeans told me that all the gold together was 800 talents weight. Outside the temple are 2 altars, one of solid gold, which is only lawful to the offer suckling, the other a common altar, but of great size, on which the full-grown animals are sacrificed. It is also on the great altar that the Chaldeans burn and frankincense, which is offered to the amount of 1,000 talents weight every year at the festival of the god. In the time of Cyrus there was likewise in the temple a figure of a man, 12 cubits high, entirely of solid gold. I did not myself see this figure, but I relate what the Chaldeans reporting concerning it. Darius, the son of Hypatis, plotted to carry the statue off, but he did not the hardihood to lay his hands upon it. So basically, within the temple and around the temple, there's all this gold. There are these huge statues. But within this other area, there only sits a woman with no statues or idols. So, and all the while, the Mesopotamians basically think that these idols they have are literal physical embodiments for their gods. Babylon was a place of idolatry that viewed the gold as Marduk himself. And the woman, she's supposed to basically channel Marduk into the temple herself. So what's really going on here is the temple has these idols and these living sacrifices, and even sacrifices based in blood, to strengthen the connection with the god. The woman, it's basically a sexual connection, because sex is the sacred act of reconnecting with the other half. So this attracts the god. And of course, as it states, it's the god of his choice. And furthermore, the gold. Gold has a lot of components to it that are electrical and mechanical in nature. It's used in computers, just small bits of it. And here they have huge, huge idols made entirely of gold that they are basically empowering with their beliefs through these festivals, which even going on are even remembered and carried on in the times past the Babylonians, even after the time of Nebuchadnezzar. So this is what Herodotus is describing. This is a secondary source. And here is a tertiary source which compiles several different accounts of the Tower of Babel, and even American accounts. You see, this story is so widespread that it's even in America before Christian missionaries show up. So it states, it's titled "The Confusion of Languages." The sequence of events as presented in the book of Genesis places the catastrophe of Babel next after the deluge. And the whole land was of one language and one speech, and they said, "Go, let us build us a city and a tower, whose top may reach unto heaven." And the Lord said, "Behold, the people is one, and they all have one language. Go down and let us confound their language." So the Lord scattered them abroad from thence upon face all the earth. The rabbinical sources explain the purpose of the tower was to secure a shelter for the city of Babel in case the deluge should occur another time. And it states, in quotes, "The men who were before us God has destroyed with the deluge. If he shall again think fit to be wroth with us and seek to destroy us even with a deluge, we shall all perish to a man. But come, let us prepare bricks and bake them with fire, so that they may withstand the waters, and building them together with the asphalt. Let us make a high tower to the top of which shall reach the heaven, in order that, being delivered from the deluge, we might find safety in the tower." Now, I just want to state here that there is absolutely no way the tower could save the town. All the tower would do would buy time for a select few that the tower could actually maintain. Now, how many people could it maintain? I don't know. But I know it wouldn't be the thousands of people who make up the totality of the town. But as it states here, we shall all perish to a man. So in their minds, it's better to put all this effort towards a tower that might save some of them, instead of looking for solutions that might save them from this catastrophe in more larger numbers. Because realistically, how much food could the tower hold to sustain them through a deluge? Only enough for a select few. And if you're out there working to build the tower, and you're out there actually baking the bricks or placing the bricks and placing the mortar and the bitumen, I'm pretty sure you're probably not going to be selected to be blessed with the safety of the tower in the case of a deluge. The purpose of the builders is found also an account of this catastrophe, which the Aborigines of Central America transmitted from generation to generation. Ixicholchochtli, after naming the story of the deluge, which brought to a close first world age, Atanatua is destroyed most of mankind, described the catastrophe which ended the second age, or Ihetokato Natitua. And I tried my best to pronounce those Native American words. There's some other ones, which means the house or the son of wind. And this is something that they'll say quite a bit. The wind, or the hot wind, or the fire. And as men were thereby multiplying, they constructed a very high and strong zakuwali, which means a very high tower in order to protect themselves when again the second world should be destroyed. At the crucial moment, their languages were changed, and as they did not understand one another, they went into different parts of the world. The same author also gives another version of the same catastrophe. When 1715 years had passed since the deluge, men were destroyed by a violent hurricane, Huracan, which carried off trees, mountains, houses, and people, and great buildings, although many men and women escaped, especially those that were able to take refuge in the caves and places where this great hurricane could not reach. So, continuously, mankind is dealing with catastrophes. And building these towers is seen as a way to avert these catastrophes. However, all it actually did was just bring about more and greater catastrophes. And notice how the people who seek refuge in the caves, natural places, are the ones who survive, instead of the ones who put all this energy and labor into gold idols and a giant tower that's pretending to save the people from the flood, but really taking from them in exchange for empty promises. Because as I stated, there's really no way the Tower of Babel or any of these ziggurats could realistically hold a large portion of the population of the city. The rulers know that many of them would perish in the flood anyway, but as the rabbinical text states, it seems like it's better for some to live rather than none to live. So, continues, similarly wrote Gomorrah, the wind which occurred at the time was so great, of which such force that it overthrew all buildings and trees and even broke mountains apart. Now this time period, 1510 to 1560, is what's known as the Mesopotamian Dark Age. It's within that time period. Oh, I'm sorry, that's AD. Anyway, that what I said was true, though. The 1500s BC was the Mesopotamian Dark Ages, and I'll talk a little bit about that because it comes right after the Tower of Babel. So many of the sources which recount the destruction of the Tower of Babel maintain in close accord with the Mexican accounts that the catastrophe was caused by a violent wind. Thus, the Sibyl is said to have prophesied, and the Sibyls are Greek and Anatolian. When are fulfilled the threats of the great God which he threatened men, when formerly in the Assyrian land they built a tower, and all were of one speech and wished to rise even till they climbed up to the starry heaven. Then the immortal raised a mighty wind and laid them strong necessity, for when the wind threw down the mighty tower. Then rose among mankind fierce strife and hate. One speech was changed into many dialects, and earth was filled into diverse tribes and kings. So a great wind comes and essentially knocks down humanity's great tower and scatters them on the earth and resets their language. In the book of Jubilee, it is said that the Lord sent a mighty wind against the tower and overthrew it upon the earth. The Babylonian account, as transmitted by Abedanias, tells that once men built a high tower where now is Babylon, and when it was already close to heaven, the gods sent wind and ruined the entire scheme. And men, having till been all of the same speech, received now from the gods many languages. Other accounts give the impression that a strong electrical discharge, possibly from an overcharged ionosphere, found a contact body in the high structure. According to a tradition known as the 12th century traveler Benjamin of Tudela, said, fire from the heaven fell in the midst of the tower and broke it asunder. In the tractate Sanhedrin of the Babylonian Talmud, it said, a third of the tower was burnt, and a third sank into the earth, and a third is still standing. So something about this third number is it's typically connected to the beast and the number of the beast, because when you take away the third, you have 2/3 left, and 2/3 was taken away. The taken away represents those who fell, and the third represents those who are still standing in this case. And the third the 2/3 who fell, of course, would be, if you wrote it out, would be 66.6% of the whole, or 666, the number of the beast. And the Tower of Babel story was found in the most remote parts of the world prior to the arrival of missionaries in those places, thus before the biblical account became known to the Aborigines. For instance, of the island Hau, part of the Paumotu Islands in Polynesia, the people used to tell that after great floods, the sons of Rata, who survived, made an attempt to wreck the buildings, which they could reach the sky and see the creator god, Vatia. But the god, in anger, chased the builders away, broke the buildings, and changed their language so they spoke diverse tongues. So this story is in America and Polynesia. So it is far beyond, as it says here, biblical influence, which means that the stories that it's describing are older than 500 BC. Right, so the Tower of Babel is a worldwide known story in many myths, and it continues. The natives of Hau declared that this tradition existed already with their ancestors before the arrival of the Europeans. I leave to them the responsibility for this declaration. All I can certify is that this tradition contains many ancient words which today are no longer understood by the natives. So, loss of language even amongst the people remembering it. But the memory is still there of the tower, which the people worked towards, which ended in disaster, which scattered the people all across the earth. As we can see here from the stories, the people scattered, or likely some of the people remembering it, or they are the people remembering it, who have their languages changed. These are constants throughout each of these traditions and mythologies. And it continues, Popol Vuh, the sacred book of Quichemayans, narrates that the language of all the families that were gathered at Toulon was confused, and none could understand the speech of the others. The Casca, Indian story, makes the result into the cause. The Indians narrate that a great darkness came on the high winds, which drove the vessels hither and thither. The people became separated, some were driven away. Long afterwards, when in their wandering, they met people from another place, spoke different languages, and could not understand one another. So, again, people being scattered, and losing the language. And with this exception, the Casca story may refer to any great upheaval and is actually an effect of large-scale migrations. The traditions of the people make the catastrophe the immediate cause of the confusion of languages and the dispersion as well. While the account in Genesis and that given by Abydos and various other sources connect the story with a certain place in Mesopotamia, other traditions localize it in many different countries. In each case, the entire population of the world is said to have been affected. If the nature of the catastrophe was cosmic, the same occurrence could have taken place in different countries. In this case, the existence of similar traditions in many corners of the globe is of no avail for tracing the migration of ancient tribes. The Arabic traditions make South Arabia the scene of the upheaval, followed by the confusion of languages and migrations. Similar experiences could have been brought about by one and the same cause in many places. So, I think that there's a few possibilities for why these different places are telling the same story. Number one is that these are people who scattered across the earth, just like the myths say, and these are their descendants remembering the ancestors who scattered and left this particular region after the event happened. The second possibility is these are events happening across the globe at different times and places, not in Mesopotamia. And this would mean that humanity across the world is doing the same mistakes, which is just basically idolizing their buildings and their ideas behind the buildings. And the third possibility, which I would say is probably the most least likely, but I'm just going to say that it could be possible. The uniformitarian model of the timeline is not entirely accurate, and something like Pangea would have actually been maybe a few thousand years ago instead of millions of years ago. And all these lands were connected, and America was the Holy Land, as some people think. I don't think so, however, and I do think, I know for certain that this did happen in Mesopotamia. Whether or not it was people having these in other locations, or maybe the earth was connected in a way that we don't understand, the Towers of Babel did exist in Mesopotamia. And it appears that after the flood, the plain of Mesopotamia became one of the few cultural centers of the world. Another flood would have caused the utter destruction of the human race, and this was feared because the memory of the flood was a few centuries earlier and very vivid. Observations of the movements of heavenly bodies may have provided a warning of a new catastrophe, and large structures were built for refuge. But when the event came, the structures were overwhelmed and destroyed by hurricanes and powerful electrical discharges. So the towers are just a psychological response of fear to try and counteract these catastrophes, but they're not strong enough to withstand the catastrophes, which pretty much makes the labor made to build these things in vain, because they didn't even save the people they wanted to. So really the theme here is that the solution is not to put all our eggs in one basket, so to speak. In the rabbinical concept of the seven earths, molded one out of another in successive catastrophes, the generation which built the Tower of Babel inhabited the fourth earth. But it goes on to the fifth earth, where the men become oblivious to their origin and home. Those who built the Tower of Babel are told to forget their language. This generation is called the people who lost their memory. The earth which they inhabited was the fifth earth, and the oblivion, which is pronounced Neshaya. So the loss of language is equated with the loss of memory, and I guess this even relates to this story because of the amount of confusion that there is around it. People know of the story, but we don't really know what happened. But I think I have a pretty good explanation. And this is a pretty good article that adds a lot of clarity as well. See, we can remember that language is just used to describe objective reality. And if we can put the language together, then we can come to understand objective reality from multiple perspectives. It continues, in the ancient Mexican traditions, it is told that those who survived the catastrophe of the Son of Wind lost their reason and speech. And sun is usually equated with the logos, or fire. So air carrying the fire destroyed reason and speech. Although, considering we have reason and speech now, I would say that maybe something else was destroyed. The characteristic of this catastrophe was its influence upon the mental or mnemonic capacity of the people. The description of it, as told by many tribes, if it contains authentic features, arouses to the surmise that the earth underwent an electromagnetic disturbance and that the human race experienced something that in modern times seems like a consequence of a deep electrical shock. The application of electrical current to the head of a human being often results in partial loss of memory, and also a loss of speech may be induced by the application of electrodes to the specific area of the brain. So basically, the article is concluding, or suggesting rather, that perhaps this son of wind shocked our brains in a way so that we lost a way of communicating. And I would say that that is definitely a possibility. And I would say that really what it comes down to is the shared language. There was a unifying language in Mesopotamia, but it was not a spoken language. It was a written language of cuneiform. Cuneiform during the time of Hammurabi, which would have been the first Tower of Babel, was only really understood by the bureaucratic class and the merchant class, and the working class, not really. And even amongst the merchant class, the knowledge of reading and writing was compartmentalized, and the priests had the highest level of knowledge when it came to this sort of thing. During this time period, they had the highest level of knowledge when it came to reading and writing. And so this was the language that the empires of Mesopotamia used to coordinate people to get them to do and build these huge building projects that did not benefit the people, but benefited the ruling class, as I stated. If one of the reasons they did want to build these towers was to hide from the flood, they would only really have enough room to hide themselves. So they had a language that only they could understand. It was technology, basically, like no different from, people who have all these high-tech gadgets that only they know how to use, like in the government or whatever, and only they see, while the rest of us are just out here ignorant to whatever they have. This is how writing used to be. And essentially, something happened with writing that changed the way people think. That's what's going on here, is writing brought something to the human, and reading brought something to the human mind that made us lose an aspect of our memory, because now we're relying on these pieces of paper for memory. But this is a pretty good article. It's titled "The Confusion of Languages." Some of the sources. But now we're going to look at where these places are. Where is the tower? Where are the towers of Babel? They're in a town called Hilla, Iraq, which is in about central Iraq. You got Edamananke over here. This is Old Babylon, this area. And Edamananke would sit right here. And just 11 miles southwest. Just 11 miles southwest of Edamananke would be Borsippa. And I just lost it. It's right here. But these towers are exactly 11 miles apart, which would tell me that they had some sort of measurement system like what we have today, because they are exactly 11 miles apart. I just had it on there. I'm not going to try and get it again, but the number 11 is usually associated with the two towers. If you think of like 9/11, for example, they look like a number 11. They went down on the date 11. And I would confidently say that they are built in honor of these two towers right here, because the ruling class is all aware of the history that I'm talking about. But Edamananke and Borsippa are exactly 11 miles apart, and they are the two towers of Babylon. The two towers of Babel. And here is a map of Mesopotamia. They would be around here. Here is Babylon in Borsippa, right near Kish, just south of Baghdad. And throughout many different times, many different rulers ruled this land. However, the person who built the Tower of Babel, or the person who is Nimrod in the Bible, is a combination of several historical figures. The historical figures that I'm going to say most closely resemble Nimrod, and you could probably say that there are other ones as well, is going to be Enmerkar, Sargon, and Hammurabi. So first we're going to look at Enmerkar. I didn't post the story, but the story basically goes, you have Enmerkar, who rules in this city here, Uruk. And Uruk is referred to as Kulaba in the text. And Enmerkar is demanding that all the land build him or send him manpower and material to build whatever construction project he's working for. It could be a tower, it could be anything. Uruk has a pretty big ziggurat itself. Eventually, he wants to get help from a land called Arata. And Arata is not on the map. No one knows exactly where Arata is, but the two most likely locations, I think, is going to be way over here in the west in Iran, maybe more towards the southwest. Or it's going to be way over here in the north towards Anatolia, near Mount Ararat, resembling its name, Arata. So I don't know exactly how many cities there were during Enmerkar's time. I would think most of these cities existed, but Uruk is all the way down here, and this is the seat where Enmerkar rules from. And he wants to get manpower and materials from a city that is so far, it's not even on this map. Anatolia is not on this map, and we don't know where it is in Iran, so I'm going to assume it's probably past all these places. So from there, it's likely to assume, because he makes pretty much the same decree that Nebuchadnezzar can be found making in his cylinder scroll, that he's going to organize all the people of all the land. So when he hears of Arata, wherever they are, they're really far away, he demands that they send material and manpower his way, or else he's going to be forced to exert his authority. So Enmerkar, to communicate over these long distances, creates the way that it's written. It's like he invents writing. I don't think he does invent writing, but he takes a tablet and he writes on it the message that he wants to send to Arata, because it was said that his message was too heavy for the tongue of his messenger. So his messenger carries the tablet, all over the land, wherever Arata is, literally probably hundreds of miles. You see that right there. You see the scale. So he brings this tablet to the king of Arata, and he looks at it, the king, and he calls it nails. He doesn't recognize the language. Now, I don't know. It might have something to do with the fact that Enmerkar just started writing and making scribbles on a tablet out of nowhere. So this very well could have been the very first time, at least mentioned in any historical story, that writing is used as a form of messaging between city-states. And it goes horribly for the king of Arata. He's rejected, and his word is not recognized, which, if you're a king and your word's not recognized, that's bad news, because it means that your authority is not respected. And from there, Enmerkar just goes to war with the king of Aratta. And how this relates to Nimrod is this is basically the first instance of any story that I'm aware of. I'm fairly certain it's the first instance of any story ever where language is communicated between two different people and it is explicitly not recognized and misunderstood, just as the way the Tower of Babel story is described. And it was even done with the king demanding that the king of Aratta send material and manpower to assist him in his building project. So there are undeniable parallels between Enmerkar and Nimrod and his story and his interaction between himself and the king of Aratta. Mainstream historians will place Enmerkar around 2700 BC, which is 1,000 years before Hammurabi. So he's pretty far back there. But he's already trying to centralize the land. Which brings me to my next person we're going to talk about, which is Sargon. And Sargon established the Akkadian Empire, which mainstream historians will place around 2200 BC. And this would become the most centralized civilization up to that point ever in its history. Centralized in the sense that before, if you lived in like Girsu, for example, or if you lived in Lagash or Eridu, natives of your city would rule your city in honor of the god of your city. But now with Sargon, when he took over, he would basically install governors over regions who would rule the city on behalf of the city of Akkad. And they don't know where Akkad is, but it's probably right near Baghdad, or is Baghdad. It's pronounced very similarly, Baghdad, Akkad, Akkadian Empire. And this is the first centralized city ever in Mesopotamian history. And this is still the capital in modern-day Iraq. So it's just pretty much right after Akkad. Anyway, Sargon is a guy who, he was a pretty bad dude. I'm not going to lie. He did a lot of pretty incredible things. His early picture, he kind of comes off as this person who is like this protector and shepherd. He eventually becomes so good at fighting that everyone wants to follow him, and he just takes over the land. And he kicks out the king, Lugalagazi, and is basically parading him through the streets. But what Sargon did was he made the largest empire ever up to that point, I would say, in the world. And this just changed the way people did things. Now, his empire didn't last forever. It did fall. But the memory of the centralization he brought earned him the name Sargon the Great. And he will be remembered forever because of the fact that he established the first ever centralized empire based in military imperialism. I mean, this Sargon spent 56 years of his life fighting and putting down rebellions within his empire. So this is the scale and the difference that he introduced, the scale of difference. Because as I stated before, city-states, they were pretty localized, but now you had to answer to the governor who was making sure that you're paying your tribute to the centralized city of Akkad. And that brings me to the next dude, who is basically Nimrod. which is Hammurabi. Hammurabi is famous for establishing the first law code ever written, Hammurabi's Code, which he writes explicitly in honor of his god Enlil. And if you actually look at Hammurabi, he didn't really seem to have much of a code. Hammurabi was just basically a dude who was really good at securing political alliances and betraying his allies when it benefited him, until eventually he just ended up with all of the Fertile Crescent. He was really good at lying, he was really good at deceiving others, and he was really good at making the people who followed him like him. Really good at that. He was very charismatic. And basically, all other rulers who he allied with, which he made several allies, he played the political game better than probably anyone. When their time came to pass, he would let them go. He would take them over. And many of the times, even their soldiers would willingly serve Hammurabi over their own kings. So when Hammurabi established his law code, he didn't have much resistance at first, but it did eventually collapse. Not during his lifetime, but like Sargon, it took a little while. But this was the guy, Hammurabi, during his time period, when he establishes the written law code, that he is building the Tower of Babel, which is in honor of the god of writing, Nabu. So this is Nimrod, and this is his objective. He's a combination of these types of characters. People who demand tribute, people who wage war, people who establish centralized empires and establish large construction building projects in honor of their own glory and victory in battle, essentially. Nimrod is based off these people. He is that archetype. And he basically represents what happens when the people fall for a dictator or an authoritarian. And, even during Sargon, I'm not going to say they fell for him, because there was a lot of rebellions, but, their rule was quite strong. All these characters, Enmerkar, and certainly Sargon and Hammurabi. Now I'm going to discuss what happened at the Tower of Babel from a literal and historical perspective. This tower specifically. This one is Borsippa, Birs Nimrud, or Irme Menanke. Those are the names for it. It was built around 1800 BC. It translates to tongue tower, and it was built in honor of the god Nabu. Now, Nabu is said to be the god of writing and is credited with inventing writing. However, it's actually the goddess Nisaba who is the original Mesopotamian deity credited with writing. And Nabu is this man version of this goddess. They're the same force, they're the same thing, but Nisaba was first. This one was made of sun-dried mud bricks, and it represented the planet Mercury. The purpose of the ziggurats are to serve as a fixed astrological point for a calendric system that would basically coordinate the movement of the people that the aristocracy ruled over in conjunction with the seasons and basically used them to produce agriculture and work them at moments and times when they would be most useful and productive. So astrology was another language that the ruling class knew alongside with cuneiform to control the people. And aside from that, it was a bureaucratic hub. And all that remains today are vitrified remains as seen in this picture, which, according to that one text, approximately 1/3 of the original tower still stands. So this one is about 3,000 or 2,800 years old. This is the site of Edamananke, or the tower that was built in honor of the god Marduk, and is the historical Tower of Babel that I showed you in the first scroll, which Nebuchadnezzar built and continued it from his predecessor Nabopolassar. It was built in honor of the god Merodach and the Lord who did not complete the original. Nebuchadnezzar set out to complete this work. It was made of sun-dried bricks and had an outer casing of fire-baked bricks for durability, and they were all connected and built with bitumen as mortar. Now, the sun-baked bricks were not the oven-baked bricks, and the oven-baked bricks were more durable, and as I stated, they were built in large buildings dedicated to building hundreds of bricks a day. And just as Borsippa was built for the god of Mercury, which should be noted, Mercury is actually, since it's the planet in the middle, it is basically the hermaphrodite that brings balance to the planets. And this is why, I mean, all the gods change gender a lot of the time, but Mercury will change gender the most. It also served as a fixed astrological point for the bureaucracy. And unlike Borsippa, nothing remains of Edamananke today. This is because Herodotus described, for example, that someone, I think it was Cyrus or Darius, removed the ramps that would go up the tower so that it could not be used as a fortress. And by the time Alexander the Great came to it, he saw that it was in shambles and needed to be repaired. He ordered it to be removed, and he had plans to rebuild the tower in his image. So Alexander very much wanted to continue the work of the Babylonians, because in his mind, he wanted to unite the world under his vision, something he did not live to see, however. And therefore, because he did not order it to ever be rebuilt, it was never rebuilt. And here's a good depiction of the scale of the tower. It had 7 layers, huge ramps, and it was pretty much built to tower and stand over a flood. Here it is in the left-hand corner compared to the Tower of Giza, the Pyramid of Giza, as well as the Menanduk. I think I butchered that pronunciation, but this building in Chicago, which is the tallest or at least according to this chart, the tallest brick structure in the world. And this depiction doesn't do the building justice, because while it is that tall, it's very wide. It's about as wide as a city block and looks like an apartment complex. So I'm pretty sure it's wider than this, but still, in terms of mass, it's tiny compared to this ziggurat structure here. So many, many thousands of man hours went into this structure. A whole lot of blood, sweat, and tears. So what actually happened at these towers? We have to understand that the collective produces thought patterns and energy waves, which essentially become real things. And when these energy waves of information, which come from our brain, overlap in ways that come about through work, for everyone's working towards a common goal, if everyone's praying for or chanting for certain things, this gives things psychic energy. Different layers of information and expression overlap with one another. And this creates things called egregores. And so the whole purpose of these ziggurats is to capture and channel egregores, as we saw in Herodotus's description of the tower. Gold idols everywhere. The woman in the tower. This is the woman, I should say, handpicked by the god himself as the supposed most attractive and desirable woman in the land. These are designed to attract the egregore that the people are forming to a centralized location. The overlapping layers of information channeled into a centralized building, locked in place with the stars, that channels the movements of the people around it so that the authorities can take advantage of their labor. So, the events of Borsippa are the events that are describing Nimrod. They're describing the scattering of the language. And Edamananke is the memory of the people captive in Babylon as they are writing Genesis. So you have the events, and then you have the people seeing the event from history be mirrored. Because Edamananke, it's literally just the Neo-Babylonians are just trying to do what Hammurabi did. It's literally in honor of Hammurabi and Merodach, the same god, Marduk. So, as I stated, the ziggurats housed the essence of the gods. Every single ziggurat housed the essence of the god. This is something that the Mesopotamians believed across all city-states. They believed that within the temple housed idols, and within these idols was literally the gods made incarnate on earth. And what the gods were was their belief channeled into one object, designed to capture this belief energy, this psychic energy, which is why idols are so dangerous. This is what Babylon's all about. It's literally a civilization of idol worship, worshiping their own ideas of control. So, cuneiform was the unifying language. Astrology was the unifying language. Using the writing of the stars and the writing of your own hands to control the people and direct their labor. This is what was lost at Borsippa. Something happened that shut down the imperial framework of Sargon and Hammurabi, which they used to control the people, again, through the written language of their own words and the written language of the stars to get people synced up on their work schedule. It's like the clock before the clock. You know, now today, people, they basically have the clock tell them what to do throughout the day. By this time, they got to do this. By this time, they got to do that. And they got to have it done before this time. Because if it's not done before this time, then we're going to have this after time where it's not done, where other things are going to be happening. Because the clock says so, and everyone else moves according to the clock. This was the clock that only the aristocrats understood, while synchronizing everyone else's movements to their clock through cuneiform, through astrological alignments, while capturing their energy in the form of idols and the labor of their works. So again, it's a fixed point for the stars and the moon. However, as I stated, the Neo-Babylonians were attempting to recreate the systems of the old ways, which failed. However, when Hammurabi was doing it during his time, people did not really know about this stuff as much. They knew it was going on, but they didn't understand it to the level of the aristocrats and the elites and the people doing it. But by the time you come to the time of Nebuchadnezzar, which is over 1,000 years later, now the people are more literate. Now the people know how to read cuneiform. Now they understand the movement of the stars. They understand reading and writing in a way that was not present over 1,000 years beforehand. And because of this, they began understanding the Babylonian myths better than the Babylonians. They surpassed their captors. And this is what the whole prophecy of Daniel's about. He starts looking at their stuffs. He starts interpreting their dreams. And he does a better job of it than they do. This is because the old ways were just less effective. Because the people knew the old ways. They had time to learn the languages that the old centralized imperial systems used to control the people. And then they basically began writing their own stories based off of the Mesopotamian stories to counteract their rule. And it ended up working big time. And now it's the people who were in captivity and their accounts that are remembered, and not the people who were trying to use these accounts to control everyone and fix them according to their astrological alignments, according to their written laws, and capture their energy and egregores in the form of idols and temples. So what happened to Borsippa? Why is it vitrified? Well, the most likely reason is that it had channeled so much energy, so much information, that it basically lit up like the only cell phone there was on the planet to a satellite, screaming, "Here I am, notice me, see me." And it was noticed. And they're going to say that a lightning likely struck it. Lightning likely struck it. And this is because they were taking the natural forces of humans, which is our psychic energy and our physical energy, channeling it into our idols in one centralized point that became so noisy. Nature reacted. And remember what Nebuchadnezzar calls his tower. The house, the foundation of heaven and earth, Ziggurat in Babylon. And what does Marduk say in the Enuma Elish? It says that he is the one who splits the heavens and the earth. And here is the foundation of what Marduk split. the temple built in honor of him, designed to house him and contain him, and coordinate everyone's work, according to what Marduk wants and decrees in the Enuma Elish, which he decrees humanity is the Lulu, designed to make the existence of the gods easier. So this is the purpose, and this is what's happening with the Tower of Babel. You have the towers, which are designed to capture the energy and attention of the people, which creates an egregore, which is the culmination of all these people's beliefs in a centralized location, and coordinate that centralized location with the stars themselves and their own written language to coordinate the movement of the people and make them predictable and get them on the patterns that the bureaucratic priest class wants them to be on. So now we're going to take a look at how they maintain this egregore and how they keep the collective thought patterns required to empower it going and going. The festival of Akitu is a pretty good example of this. The festival and the ritual humiliation of the king. And it describes this 11-day ritual, just like how the two towers are 11 miles apart, which highlights a festival on day 4, for example, where they recite the Enuma Elish in front of a cult statue of Marduk. So, they're just standing in front of an idol, praising Marduk's victory over Tiamat and how great he is. The 8th day is basically they take this idol of Marduk and they parade him through the streets and show everyone how great Marduk is, and everyone's given the statue their energy. The people who are reading the incantations and reciting Marduk's victory to him, they're given the idol energy. And on the 11th day, Marduk and the other gods formed a triumphant procession back to Babylon. And this established that the Akitu house was probably the only point in the Babylonian calendar where the general public could witness the statues' cults of the gods. So this just basically serves as a period where they got to take the battery that powers the egregore, and they got to move it through the city so everyone could chant at it and let it know how much they appreciate him ruling over them. The 5th day describes a humiliation ritual where they take away the king's scepter and all his other royal garments and make him kneel on the ground before a priest in honor of Marduk. And here is Marduk depicted with his faithful friend, Mušḥuššu. And we're going to get into Mušḥuššu because Mušḥuššu is very important to understanding the egregore's relationship in all this. But first, let's look at the humiliation ritual that the Babylonian kings and the Mesopotamian kings would need to do in honor of Marduk. They would get on their knees, and before the priest recites, "I did not sin in the Lord of the lands. I was not neglectful of your divinity. I did not destroy Babylon. I have not commanded its dispersal. I did not make Esagil tremble." And Esagil is Marduk's temple. "I did not treat its rights with contempt. I did not strike the cheek of the Kadinu citizens. I did not humiliate them. I did not to Babylon. I did not destroy its outer walls." So basically, the king is just going on about how greatly he served the city of Babylon and how greatly he carried out Marduk's rule and how he respected the authority that Marduk bestows to him. And he's saying this to the representation of Marduk himself, the Babylonian priest. And after a break in the text, the high priest reassures the king that Marduk will support and extol his kingship and destroy his enemies. and then the high priest returns the king's insignia, after which he strikes the king's cheek a second time. He, the high priest, strikes the king's cheek, and when he has struck his cheek, if his tears flow, Marduk is content. If his tears do not flow, Marduk is angry, and an enemy will arise and bring about the king's downfall. So, the king, they don't want it to go to his head that he is the one in charge. He is not the one in charge. Marduk is the one in charge. And what does Marduk represent? The collective belief that the king and the priests are tasked to maintain so that they keep the status quo, which they inherited, going and flowing throughout time. And so this crying, they really want to drain the king. They want to make him get it all out. Actually, it states what the rituals are for a little bit. The second slap of the king's cheek is designed to produce tears as a result of a physical action. Thus, ritual weeping was not conceived as an expression of one's inner emotional state, as in the practice of hiring professional lamenters at funerals, something that is known from ancient Mesopotamia and various other ancient traditional cultures. Lament and ritual weeping was conceived as a demonstrative and performative act. So they want it to hurt the king. He needs to feel pain, and he needs to cry. And he needs to put on an act before Marduk that he felt the pain and that he was crying and that his pain was that sincere. The acts of prostration, penitence, and ritual weeping featured in this ritual are intended to promote divine favor, as shown by various other forms of evidence from Mesopotamian ritual and literature. So they have to make sure that the king is thoroughly humiliated and knows his place, because if he doesn't, he might start to think that he's the one in charge. But within the machine of civilization, which is powered by the aggregor of the collective, the king's actions are entirely reliant on maintaining the belief of the collective in alignment with his own interests. And that was something established before he took the throne. His interests, that is. He does not establish his own interests. But now let's look to Nimrod and how the Bible describes Nimrod. He was the mighty hunter before the Lord, even as Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. It says it twice. So, Nimrod, who is these Hammurabi, Enmerkar, and Sargon rolled into one. He's the archetype of what they are. What is he hunting? He's hunting humans, men and women, to power his belief system. That's what Nimrod is the real hunter for. It's not just animals or lions or whatever. Nimrod is hunting humans to hunt God. It's like the same thing, because the humans, we make the gods that he wants. And we'll get into what Nimrod's philosophy is. He's not just a cartoon villain. He has legitimate reasons for why he does the things he does. These Hammurabis and these Sargons. However, let us look at the Genesis Tower of Babel. We'll read the whole thing here. It states, "Now the world had one language and a common speech, and people moved eastward. They found the plain in Shinar and settled there." And that's the map that I was showing here. They said to each other, "Come, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly." They used the bricks instead of stone for tar and mortar. Then they said, "Come, let us build us ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens, so that we may make a name for ourselves. Otherwise, we will be scattered over the face of the earth." Making a name for themselves based in cuneiform and astrology and a language that only they, the aristocracy, can understand was their goal. However, the people who wrote this story here beat them at their own game during the time of Nebuchadnezzar. And it continues, "But the Lord came down to see the city, the tower that the people were building. The Lord said, as the people are speaking the same language, they have begun to do this, then nothing they do will be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and confuse their language so they will not understand each other." And the Lord scattered them over the face of the earth, and he confused their language. So, what's happening in this text is twofold. You have the people who wrote this Genesis version who are copying this based off of the older Borsippa events of Tongue Tower, of the god of Nabu, things like Enmerkar, stories like of Hammurabi as well, and merging them into this narrative here. And they would be physically describing, when they say, "Come, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly," they're describing Edamananke. They're describing the huge ovens they had. They aren't describing the sun-baked bricks of Borsippa. However, the events that they're talking about here, when the Lord scattered them over the earth and they lost their language, that is Borsippa. So here is Edamananke, here is Borsippa, and of course, these two events parallel each other because the Neo-Babylonians are literally trying to recreate the ancient Babylonian Empire in their image. But they fail, and so they pretty much scatter too. So this is a twofold event that's happening across time to the same people trying to do the same thing, the Babylonians. And both times they fail. Let us look to the serpents. Mušḥuššu, who is Marduk's friend. He is from ancient Mesopotamian mythology, a mythological hybrid, and is a scaly animal with hind legs resembling that of an eagle and lion-like forelimbs, and a long neck and tail, 2 horns on its head, and a snake-like tongue, and a crest. It most famously appears on the Ishtar gates of Babylon, which are the gates that lead to the Tower of Babel and that temple, the Temple of Marduk. The form Mušḥuššu is Akkadian and nominative Sumerian. It means reddish snake or fierce snake, and possibly even splendor serpents. And he appears in religion and arts on the libation vase of Gaudia, and is dedicated to the god Ningizida, who is the ruler of that city from the 21st century BC. So that would be from around the time between Sargon and Hammurabi. And Ningizida he's a agriculture god who's also centered around war. He's very similar to Ninurta, but Ninurta, he seems a lot greater in terms of impact than Ningizida. The Mušḥuššu was the sacred animal of Marduk and his son Nabu during the Neo-Babylonian Empire, and the dragon Mušḥuššu, whom Marduk once vanquished, became his symbolic serpent. And it says he got it from Tishpak, but this serpent used to belong to Tiamat. It was one of the monsters she made to combat the Anunnaki that Tiamat or Marduk defeated. So what does Mušḥuššu and the serpent represent? It represents frequencies and vibrations. Snakes move in a slithering manner, and this resembles waves or words like sound waves. If you can think of yourself being in an ocean, and all your actions, words, and thoughts generate currents and waves that generate outwards that affect the environment and even affect other people if the waves interact with them. This is what Mušḥuššu represents. This is what the serpent is. And when Marduk took the serpent from Tiamat, it represented a hijacking of our thoughts. You see, the serpent is neutral. The serpent will serve whatever our desires and wills are, because the serpent is ultimately a result of our desires and wills. However, there are also higher frequencies that are not made by humans that we can choose to align ourselves to or not. And Marduk mostly represents a god from the perspective of the Babylonians and them using Marduk to rule over the people. He represents a god who is hijacking their thoughts and their energies and channeling it towards him. He has conquered Mušḥuššu, who once aided Tiamat, and Tiamat is really the natural god of the earth. Tiamat represents nature and being in harmony with nature, which the Anunnaki and the Babylonians portray in a fearful manner. So Marduk, seizing Mušḥuššu from Tiamat, this neutral force of nature, is basically Marduk hijacking the people's thoughts and making them serve him as his pets at his side, or his sacred animal. So Mušḥuššu is not bad at all. It's all about who is in control of Mušḥuššu. Are you in control of it, or someone else? And here's a picture of Mušḥuššu on the gate. You can see here it's depicted with legs. Back when the serpent was said to have had legs, the Babylonians remember. And this brings me to my next text, which is going to be the Apocalypse of Abraham, which explains the role of the serpent in relation to how it affects our thoughts and why our thoughts perpetuate the outcomes that we are living with now. So here, God is talking to Abraham, and he's trying to paint him a picture of human history. And human history here is presented by biblical history. So it goes from Adam and Eve through Cain and other biblical characters. And God is showing Abraham basically the fate of his own descendants and why they're going to bring about destruction on the earth. So here he's telling Abraham to look at the picture of Adam and Eve And Abraham said, and I looked at the pictures, and my eyes ran to the side of the Garden of Eden. And I saw there a man very great in height and terrible in breadth, incomparable in aspect, entwined with the woman who was also equal. To the man in aspect and size, they were standing under a tree of Eden, and the fruit of the tree was like the appearance of a bunch of grapes of the vine. And behind the tree was standing something like a dragon in form, but having hands and feet like a man on his back, and 6 wings on his right and 6 on his left. And he was holding the grapes of the tree and feeding them to the 2 I saw entwined with each other. So, pretty much resembles this creature here. Mušḥuššu got the wings, the hands and legs. It's just a bit more exaggerated and made to look evil or bad. And I said, who are these 2 intertwined with each other? Or who is this between them? And what is the fruit they are eating, mighty one eternal? And he said, this is the word of men. This is Adam, and this is their thoughts on earth. And this is Eve, and who is between them is impiety of their behavior unto perdition, Azazel himself. And Azazel, it basically translates to Azaz, mighty, El, God. So Azazel is just mighty God, when Abraham is talking to the eternal mighty one. So you got mighty God here, and you got the eternal mighty one. And I said, eternal mighty one, why then did you adjudge him such dominion that through his works he could ruin mankind on earth? And he said to me, hear, Abraham, those who desire evil, and all whom I have hated as they commit them over them, did I give him dominion, and he was to be beloved of them. So just think about what God is saying here in light of what I'm saying of the serpent. Abraham asks him, who are these 2 with each other, and who is between them? And God answers this exactly as Abraham questions him. This is the world of men. This is Adam, and this is their thought on earth. This is Eve. Who is between Adam and Eve? Their thoughts. What is the serpent? It's your thoughts. And so they had the thoughts of Azazel, of basically becoming a mighty God. And then Abraham asks basically, why did you adjudge him such dominion through his works? Why even give him the possibility to do such a thing? And God says, those who desire evil, and all whom I have hated and committed over them, did I give him dominion. And he was too beloved of them. We have thoughts. We can do many things. And what God is pointing out to Abraham here is of all the things that we could desire as humans, these people here desired impure and wicked thoughts, which led to destruction and evil deeds. The serpent is our thoughts. And notice how they are eating the fruits of the serpent. Well, what do fruits symbolize? Our labor, our work. So the serpent is false thoughts, which lead to false labor, false deeds which harm other people, which harm their individuality and creativity, and forces them into things like a centralized bureaucracy that gets their movement synced up with the stars in a vortex-like fashion. And I answered and said, mighty, eternal one,
Why did it please you to bring about that evil should be desired in the heart of men? Because you are angered at what was chosen by you, him who does useless things in your lights. And he said to me thus, close to the nations for your sake and for the sake of those set apart after you, the people of your tribe, as you will see in the picture what is burdened on them. And I will explain to you what will be and everything that will be in the last days. Now look at everything in the picture. And I looked and I saw there the creatures that had come into being before me. And I saw, as it were, Adam and Eve, who was with him, and with him the crafty adversary, and Cain, who had been led by the adversary to break the law. And I saw the murdered Abel, and the perdition brought on him and given through the lawless one. And I saw the fornication of those who desired it, and its defilement of their zeal, and the fire of the corruption in the lower depths of the earth. And I saw the theft of those who hastened after it, and the system of their retribution, the judgment of the great court. I saw their naked men, forehead to forehead, and their shame and harm they wrought against their friends in retribution. And I saw their desire in her hand, the head of every kind of lawlessness, and her torment of her dispersal, destined destruction. So what's going on here is false thoughts, wrong thoughts based in false beliefs which don't conform to reality, will set off chains of events throughout history that, unless the root cause of these events is addressed, will only perpetuate suffering. This means that whoever ate the fruit of Azazel, the serpent, the adversary, they had thoughts that basically made them think they were better than other people, and they treated other people as such and treated them as means to an end. This is basically the meaning of the Tower of Babel, for example, broken down very simply. The state saw people as a means to an end because they have false beliefs about the world. And when you have false beliefs about the world, it leads to false labor and false fruits, if you will, which impacts the lives of those around you, which just creates a cycle of suffering based off of impure thoughts that we choose to desire. And when we stop choosing to desire the false thoughts symbolized by the serpent Azazel, then we can stop making false mighty gods and come into the light of the eternal mighty one. And Abraham continues, I saw there the likeness of idol jealousy, like a carpenter's figure, such as my father used to make, and its body was glittering copper, and before it a man he was worshipping. And there was an altar of opposites, it and boys being slaughtered on it, the face of the idol. So now we've taken our beliefs, they've crystallized to such a point where we are literally out sacrificing and killing other people to empower our false beliefs. This is the extent that we've taken it to, that God is pointing out to Abraham. And I asked him, what is this idol? And what is the altar? Or who are those being sacrificed? Or who is the sacrificer? And what is the handsome temple which I see, the art and beauty of your glory that lies beneath your throne? And he said, Here, Abraham, this temple which you have seen, the altar of the works of art, this is my idea of the priesthood, of the name of my glory, where every petition of man will enter and dwell, the ascent of kings and prophets, and whatever sacrifice I decree made for me, among my coming people, even of your tribe. And the body you saw is my anger, because the people who will come to me out of you will make me angry. And the man you saw slaughtering is he who angers me. The sacrifice is the killing of those who are for me a testimony of the judgment of the completion at the beginning of creation. God sees us as his children. We have desires, and we have unlimited amounts of thoughts and potentials that we can do. And what makes God so angry is that and here he's talking specifically about the descendants of Abraham, the people who will come to me out of you. We continue to empower the false beliefs that separate us from God and force us down the path of idolatry. And what is idolatry? If you break the word down phonetically, it basically just means the idol tree, an idle person, an idle group of people stuck on one tree, missing the forest. It is the word missing the forest from the trees in one, because it insinuates that you're so idle against this tree and you've got your face so far up to it that you don't see anything other than your own beliefs. And when you live this way and you have such a disrespect for life around you, that your beliefs are what's right, then you will begin to sacrifice and treat others as a means to an end. And as he states, the man you saw slaughtering is he who angers me. So God is mad at the people who choose to slaughter and kill and idolize over false beliefs and impure desires, and choosing the impure desires over better ones. And the sacrifice is a killing of those who are for me a testimony of the judgment of the completion at the beginning of creation. All the bodies, all the death that is caused by our false belief is in God's mind more proof that when humanity chose to follow the path of false desires, false beliefs, harmful thoughts, that we would never come out of it. And that choice is not something God can make. It's something we have to make for ourselves, because as God said, we are the ones in control of our desires. But we have failed to control our desires, and this is what angers God, because we act in such immoral ways based off our false beliefs. And Abraham said to the mighty one, "Why did you establish it to be so, to call on the testimonies of this one?" And he said to me, "Hear, Abraham, and understand that I will explain to you and answer whatever I ask you. Why did your father, Terah, not obey your voice and abandon the demonic worship of idols until he persisted, and all of his house with him?" And Abraham said, "Eternal mighty one, surely because it did not please him to obey me, nor did I follow his works." And he said to me, "Hear, Abraham, as the counsel of your father is in him, as your counsel is in you, so also the counsel of my will is ready. In the days to come, you will not know them in advance, nor the future men you will see with your own eyes, that they are your seed. Look at the picture." And God is trying to show Abraham the full extent of his seed, which, and he's using his father as an example, of the type of people that are going to come after him. Basically, what's being demonstrated here is people are very inclined to follow the way of their parents and ancestors, even if it might come at their own detriment and the detriment of people around them. God wants people to do what's
right because it's right, not because they were told to or they're upholding some tradition. And it continues. And I looked, and I saw, and behold, the picture swayed, and from its left side a crowd of heathens ran out, and they captured the men, women, and children who were on its right side. And some they slaughtered, and others they kept with them. Behold, I saw them running to them by way of 4 ascents. They burned the temple with fire. They plundered the holy things that were in it. And I said, Eternal One, the people you received to me are robbed by the hordes of the heathen. They are killing some and holding others as aliens. And they burned the temple with the fire. And they are stealing and destroying the beautiful things which are in it. Eternal Mighty One, if this is so, why have you afflicted my heart, and why will it be so? And he said to me, Listen, Abraham, all you will have seen will happen on account of your seed, who will continually provoke me, because of the body which you saw, and the murder in what was depicted in the temple of jealousy. And everything you saw will be so. The temple of jealousy. What is the temple of jealousy? It's Nimrod the hunter wanting to claim God's power for himself. It's people like that. Those types of people who want to control the whole land to conform to their word is pretty much the closest that a human being can come to God. And it's basically a misuse of the power of what the human being is actually capable of. Just for the individual king themselves who's ruling over the people, and most certainly for the people who are forced to live under the king's rule. It's a destruction of nuance. And I said, Eternal Mighty One, let the evil works be done in iniquity now pass by. But make commandments in them more than just works, for you can do this. And he said to me, Again, the time of justice will come upon them, at first through the holiness of kings, and I will judge with the justness those whom I created earlier, to rule from them in them. And from these same ones will come men who have regard for them, as I announced you, and you saw. So there is hope. Justice will come. But the question is, how long are we going to have to wait until these great men like Abraham come around and challenge the systems? And it continues. And I answered and said, Mighty Eternal One, you are sacrificed by your power, but merciful in my petition, since for you informed me and showed me, since have brought me up to your height before, therefore inform me, your beloved, about whatever I ask. What I saw be there long, be lot for long. And he showed me a multitude of his people and said, For this reason it is through 4 ascents that my anger will be because of them, and in them will be retribution for their works. And in the 4th ascent is 100 years. And it ends even with the approaches as much as the heathens, as among the heathens. So basically, the evil that we put into the world is going to be reflected right back at us. That will be our punishment. That will be the justice that God talks about. And then, after that time happens, essentially, righteous men and women can come along and attempt to do better. But we have to recognize the serpent within, the serpent of our thoughts, and how our thoughts create our actions and deeds. This is what God sees. God sees our thoughts. God knows our desires. What desires are we choosing to express in the world, which becomes our actions and deeds? Once we master our own thoughts, then we can work in true harmony towards
a vision that God would more so want for us than the reality that we've crafted for us based off of our false visions of what we think reality should be. So now at the end, like I said, I would give philosophical and allegorical interpretations to the Tower of Babel, because it is not just historical and literal. There are real philosophical points we can take from it, as well as allegorical and mythopoetic interpretations we can get. And I'm going to be talking about Nimrod's own personal philosophy, because as I said, he's not a bad guy for the sake of being a bad guy. He has real fears, real concerns. The socio-political reality of his fears and concerns, of what, his thoughts of what he wanted to do, and then, the actual effects of what his thoughts created, as well as the biblical allegory, which describes Jacob and its parallels to the Tower of Babel as a ladder, as well as my own syncretic allegory. So this is basically a dark side and a light side philosophical interpretation, because the Nimrod philosophy and philosophical reality is kind of dark, but the biblical allegory and my own syncretic allegory are not dark. They're very empowering. So Nimrod's philosophy was basically, he represents the archetype who realized that humanity could create egregores. And he looked at the civilization around him, like Sargon, for example, and he saw basically humans who were weak and dependent and vulnerable to another catastrophe. And our relationship with our egregores were seen as a source of the problem. And because the egregores in these times are basically God, these people were basically challenging God, but using the same names that everyone's familiar with. Rather than conforming to the standards that God or the gods of the city-states wanted from their rulers, this guy, or this Nimrod character, basically just took that power for himself and wielded it in the way that he saw fit. And he thought that if he could control the egregores and the collective thought patterns of humans and direct it towards the way he wanted to, that humans would no longer be weak and dependent, and they would be strong and self-sufficient, and maybe one day even be on his level. Because this was a guy, Hammurabi, Sargon, these were people who saw themselves as the strongest people in all the land, and the only people with the will capable of doing what was necessary. And in their minds, doing what was necessary was, typical king stuff of uniting as much land as possible under your banner. Because that way you can flex your will over the maximum amount of people. So Nimrod saw a real problem. But he thought that if he could control the source of the problem, which is the serpent, the false thoughts, and if he could override people's thoughts, then he could solve the problem. But you cannot. Because all he did was, he took the beliefs people had, and he made them way more fearful and dependent on the civilizations that came after. It's essentially trying to use the ring to reform Mordor. You cannot use the ring to reform the orcs
or change Sauron. The only way that you can actually change these things is to change yourself first. And then resist these evil things, these evil acts as much as possible. And I think Gandalf even says something like in The Lord of the Rings. In his mind, it's not great warriors who keep evil at bay. It's simple people who do simple things and help one another that keeps evil at bay. Because this is the reflection of someone with pure thoughts performing pure deeds, rather than someone with fearful thoughts performing deeds of conquest to control that which they fear. So Nimrod had, I would say, noble intentions. He saw a real problem. He wanted humanity to go down a stronger path, but all he did was make them more dependent. And here is the political reality of what Nimrod actually created. He created a hive mind, no different from ants who follow the pheromones of the queen ant and is directed entirely by these pheromones to produce structures necessary for the colony. Now, this is perfectly fine for the ants. The ants have their place in nature. However, human beings are not ants. And the Tower of Babel, I'm not the only person who compares it to an anthill. This is a common comparison that has been made to it, that it resembles an anthill. And the collective memory, which is represented by that picture there on the left, which is a pretty long-standing common depiction of the Tower of Babel. Basically, the collective memory resembles that of a human anthill in its appearance, in the way we think of the tower, in the way we visualize the tower. And just like the pheromones coordinating the ants, which are produced by the queen bee, the aristocrats of the city-state would produce their own pheromones or software to power the hardware or their cities through the power source, which was the people. So all this cuneiform myths, all these astrological alignments that Babylon would do to coordinate its citizens is fundamentally no different from the way a queen ant coordinates her workers to fulfill the necessary functions of the colony. The biggest difference is human beings are not ants, and our thoughts and our deeds are very powerful, a lot more powerful than ants. And we can look to the ants and we can see they have great strength and great power in the work they do. And this is something that Nimrod tried to get out of humans. He wanted us to be strong. He wanted us to be independent. But by trying to make us independent, all he did was make us more dependent on centralized systems. And so the Tower of Babel just created a human hive mind where humans were no different from insects or ants, conforming to one standard, one language, which was produced by a centralized authority, no different from a queen ant. And this is the reality of the good intentions of Nimrod that he produced. He had basically the serpent of Azazel right there with him. He wanted to be the mighty God. He wanted to produce the mighty civilization. But all he did was produce bad deeds, rotten fruits that corrupted everyone else under his rule. And there's a biblical allegory as well, which talks about the two kingdoms. One mentioned in Genesis 11, which I read about the Tower of Babel. And another one in Genesis 28, which is Jacob's dream at Bethel. And here it reads, Jacob left Beersheba and set out for Haran. When he reached a certain place, he stopped for the night because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones there, he put it under his head and lay down to sleep. He had a dream in which he saw a stairway resting on the earth, with its top reaching the heaven. And the angels of God were ascending it and descending on it. There above it, they stood the Lord, and he said, I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham and the God of Isaac. I will give you and your descendants the land on which you are living. Your descendants will be like dust on the earth, and you will spread out to the west, to the east, to the north, and to the south. All the people of the earth will be blessed through you and your offspring. I am with you and will watch over you whenever you go, and I will bring you back to this land, and I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. When Jacob awoke from his sleep, he thought, surely the Lord is in this place, and I was not aware of it. He was afraid and said, how awesome is this place! This is none other than the house of God, the gate to heaven. And what's being described here is we can choose to recognize that God's place is all around us. It's to the north, it's to the south, to the east, to the west. Everywhere. Everywhere we go, we're in God's place. And Jacob realizes how awesome this is, and realizes that accepting that everywhere is God's place is the gate to heaven. And what is the gate to heaven? It's our thoughts. What are our desires? What are our deeds? And aligning our thoughts and our deeds towards righteous action, towards that, or I should say, towards acknowledging that God is within all things, then we can climb the ladder and ascend to heaven and come about a better kingdom than that which is described in the Tower of Babel. And now, here's my own philosophical and syncretic interpretation for what the Tower of Babel means, and how you or we can better climb the tower to heaven, or the ladder to heaven, that Dan or Jacob saw in his dream. And it has to do with not building towards external materialistic things. We're never going to find any salvation in any project resembling technological salvation, resembling building a tower, resembling building multiple towers like 5G towers. We're not going to find any salvation going to Mars. We have to build ourselves. The same way we build those things, we have to work on our thoughts. We have to work on our deeds and actions to become or be more desirable in the eyes of nature. Because when we do that, we will bring about positive change in the world and positive outcomes which are reflected through our actions. And how do we become the towers ourselves? Rather than building external towers, build ourselves to become strong like the towers. Revelation 10 tells us about this. And it says, "Then I saw another mighty angel coming down from heaven. He was robed in a cloud, with a rainbow above his head. His face was like the sun, and his legs were like fiery pillars. He was holding a little scroll which lay open in his hand. He planted his right foot on the sea and his left foot on the land, and he gave a loud shout like the roar of a lion. And when he shouted, the voices of the seven thunders spoke.
And when the seven thunders spoke, I was about to write, but I heard a voice from heaven say, seal up what the seven thunders have said, and do not write it down. The angel I had seen standing on the sea and on the land raised his hand to the heaven, and he swore by him who lives forever and ever, who created the heavens and all that is in them, the earth and all that is, and the sea and that is in it, and said, there will be no more delay, but in the days when the seventh angel is about to sound his trumpet, the mystery of God will be accomplished, just as he announced to his servants, the prophets. So what he's talking about here is if you align your thoughts, the physiology of your body will basically generate your own inner serpents, and you will master the world around you, represented here by the occultic elements, earth, water, fire, air, and spirits, represented by the rainbow. What is the rainbow? It's the bridge. It's the gate between heaven and earth. The thing which Nebuchadnezzar stated his tower was. But the true heaven, or the true bridge between heaven and earth, is right here in your head, because as God told Abraham in the apocalypse of Abraham, it's our thoughts and our deeds which he cares about. And by mastering your inner serpent, your inner thoughts, you will bring alignment to your own body and bring about alignment and harmony to the natural world around you. You will be as if you're one and the same. Just as this angel here is depicting that. Literally, that's what this allegorical art represents. It represents what happens when an individual masters their own thoughts, masters the elements around them, the external world, because their thoughts are pure and their deeds are pure. And now they've bridged heaven and earth. And that's why the angel says, there will be no more delay. But in the days when the seventh angel is about to sound his trumpet, the mystery of God will be accomplished, just as he announced to the prophet. Well, what's above the angel's head there? The seven rays of light. The seven angels. And when the seventh angel is made known and sounds his trumpet, the mystery of God will be accomplished. Once you activate righteous thoughts, perhaps like that which was described, what was lost at Babel, or even before that, lead to righteous actions. And this means that we are channeling God's work through us here in the present moments. This is what it means to build your inner tower. It means to recognize how you view the world, align yourself with the world around you, and channel the angels of God through your head, and bridge heaven and earth through your actions, as right thoughts make right actions. And that's what the Tower of Babel story is all about. It's about a man who had thoughts about the world where he identified real problems, but his thoughts were impure because he was prideful and thought he was the one who was strong enough to control the world. But true mastery can only be done through each individual. Only the individual can channel the seven light rays through their head and bridge God and bridge the heavens and earth the same way the rainbow does, and master the natural elements around them: fire, earth, air, wind. It's all up to what we choose and what we desire that determines the works and actions of our lives. And with that, guys,
I thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.